Mm. Okay, welcome everyone to this session on requirement gathering and backlog management. My name is Horam and I am co-founder of Pakistan Agile Scrum Exchange. The purpose of this platform is to spread Agile and Scrum awareness in Pakistan through these online meetups and online groups. And in today's session will be given by Muneeb Zubair. Muneeb has over 14 years of experience in IT and BPO industries, which helped him in gaining crucial experience in customer client services, training requirement gathering, solution architecture, and team leadership, client collaboration, and expecting setting, release management, and agile project management. He's here to share his experience and anecdotes of vast experience working with local and international clients. By participating in this session, you will also earn one Scrum education unit that you can report on Scrum Alliance website as well. And if you face some technical glitches, please try to restart your client or try to reconnect to this session as well. Good. So let's get started. Over to you, Muneeb, then.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, and I welcome you all to this webinar. So basically, as Herb mentioned, we are going to be discussing in regards to my experiences in terms of the requirement gathering and backlog management. Now, before we start, just a second. So before we start, I'm sure that you guys have heard of the activity or the game which is called Chinese Whisper. So this is something that you guys can actually do in your offices or with your teams. And the reason of doing this kind of activity, I'll be telling you later. But basically, what the activity is that you actually whisper a phrase or any kind of any kind of word or any kind of phrase to the person. You whisper to him, and that person needs to whisper it to the next person and to the next and to the next. And but the condition is that it should not be repeated and it should be done as fast as possible. Just like in Agile, the objective is to reach the goal or reach working software by the end of the release. So same thing with the Chinese Whisper. By the end of that activity, you will find some really interesting results. So you guys can actually share those results in regards to what happens with you. But let me share my experience in that. Let me just put it this way. I started with this phrase, and what I ended up with was "Ye kya masla hai?" Right? So basically, the purpose behind having this kind of activity is to gauge and understand that communication is very, very important when we are talking about Agile, when we're talking about requirement gathering, and how the difference in the levels of the people who are involved can actually have an effect in the overall product. So try it out when it comes to with your teams, and hopefully you guys will have pretty much similar results. So what we hope to do today is that we are going to be covering, as I mentioned, two items, which is requirement gathering and backlog management. And when it comes to requirement gathering, we were discussing about, I'm going to share my theory or share my experiences in regards to who are the requirement sources, what are the most common issues and why they happen, and what the possible solution is. And eventually, we will summarize the entire segment. And then we are going to move towards backlog management, where we are going to be talking about what are backlogs generally, what are the types of backlogs, how to manage the backlog, and then having an end note, which is going to summarize pretty much what we have discussed in the session. Please feel free to ask questions at the end of the talk. If you have any question that you cannot just wait for it, you can definitely ask me, and I will try to answer that as quickly as possible. Moving forward. So I believe Khurram has already given my introduction. So I have actually worked with different teams, different companies. I've worked with TRG, with QRMD, CurePet, which is now Navitor. I've worked with Systems, Rosie PK. I've worked in with clients which are local as well as international. I have done project management in 3 languages, so I have taken care of local clients, in Urdu, international clients from the UK, US, and Australia, in English, and also in Arabic when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Dubai. So every person, every client is different, different behaviors, different way of working. So that kind of gave me a pretty clear perspective of what kind of sources or product owners are out there. So, and currently I'm working with a Danish company, Quantum Lahore, as a development manager. All right. So what we hope to achieve in this session, and it revolves around that what kind of issues in the projects and what primary causes being there, and what the requirements basically, because they're not clear what happens, how the client envisions it, and what ends up as a product. This is what we're going to be discussing about. We are going to raise that concern in regards to how no matter how or what you do, you can't seem to have the product owner understand what is happening. We're going to be discussing how many times you had that issue where you just don't know where the requirement came from and why the feature is there in the first place. And I'm sure you guys working with developers, they would actually ask you that question: that why are we doing this? There is a better way of doing this. Why are we doing this way? So on and so forth. So during this session, I will try to shed a little bit of light in regards to these points and see how we can actually, work together in terms when it comes to Agile and when it comes to gathering requirements the right way. Moving forward. Now, I'm not sure that how many of you guys have actually the experience working in an Agile team or know what Agile is, but it all kind of starts from the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto is basically these 4 points where the individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. Now, it does not mean that there is, the items on the left is more important than the ones on the right. But when we're talking about Agile, we lean towards the left more. That means individuals' interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change. Now, if possible, can anybody right now who is available can let me know why these are actually marked in blue? So anybody?
What's the question? Can you repeat that?
Sure. So you can see that there are the 4 points of the Agile Manifesto, but I have, if you look at the interactions, collaboration, and responding, it's in blue. Any reason why this is in blue?
Muneeb, this is Khalid.
Yeah.
I feel these are the values that we should respect. Some important points for the manifesto. Am I right?
So basically, if you look at it from the entire manifesto is important. Both the left and the right. But if you look at interactions, collaboration, and response, they're all about communication, right? It revolves around communication. It revolves about what the communication is, how it's being done, what are the mediums, what are the levels, so on and so forth. So basically, what we did in the beginning, basically the activity, the Chinese whisper, that is what happens in our daily lives with the client. Because there's a difference in the level of our communication, there is always a problem that actually arises from it. For example, if you're dealing with a native, somebody from the US or somebody from UK, they have a better English level than us. No matter how good we are, we still are English would be our second language. So the level will be different. So whenever they give us a requirement, there is a possibility that we might miss on that requirement or what they envision. Then there's, of course, if the person is not an English speaker, then that's a whole new story, right? So these are the things that we need to make sure that our teams, which are involved in Agile, are actually focusing on. This is one point that most of our development teams miss out completely. Soft skills are not taken care of, which is something that needs to be taken care of if you want to make Agile work. Because most of the work in Agile is all communication. So if the communication is not good between the PO and the developers or the development team, then you have a problem over there. And no matter how good your development team is, the client might not be satisfied 100%. So this is just a point to ponder, right? So this is what pretty much our entire, in regards to requirements revolves around. That the first thing that we need to focus on is making sure that our communication, that our language meets the person on the other side. Now, is it possible? Yes, if you start working really hard on it. But do we have that kind of time? So if we do not have that kind of time, what are the alternatives? So we are going to discuss about the alternatives during this session. So moving forward, so everybody knows the requirement sources when it comes to Agile is the product owner, which is usually from the client side who actually presents them, who has information about what product is being developed or what is what's the business, so on and so forth. And he is the one who actually transfers that kind of knowledge to the development team. But there are different kinds of I would say POs out there, right? The first one is the product owner with domain and technical knowledge. The second one is the product owner who has only domain knowledge, so basically he knows the business, but technically he is pretty much nil. Then we have the product owner who has technical knowledge, so that person actually comes from an IT background and he understands how things work, but he doesn't understand the business completely. And then the product owner who's there just because he's been appointed as project owner. Now, everyone has actually some kind of, what I've seen, some kind of characteristics that come with it. For example, the first one, the product owner with domain and technical knowledge. If you look at that, those product owners are the hardest to work with. The reason is those guys are the ones who are dictating every step of the way, whether it's regards to the business rule or how the development team needs to work. It's all dictated. So there is no really room to wiggle for the developers or the development team to come up with a solution or an alternative solution. So although the responsibility then kind of like falls on the PO more, but of course, as we all know, working in Pakistan, the PO is never wrong. The development team is the one who actually bears the entire brunt of when something goes wrong. And when I'm talking about development team, I'm not just talking about the developers. I'm talking about the entire team which actually works, whether it's QA, whether it's developers, whether it's the BA, so on and so forth. So they actually get the brunt of it. Then we actually have the product owner, which has the domain knowledge, but he doesn't have that technical knowledge. I personally like to work with those kind of. Yeah. Is there a question?
Yes, there is a question. If PO behaves like manager in daily stand-up, questioning, arguing all the time, how to deal with such?
Okay.
From Muhammad Ikram.
Yeah, you would. So this is. I'm assuming that this PO is the fourth kind, right? He's the one who actually dictates, not understanding. He's not collaborating. He's not. So basically, there is a problem in the system, then, right? The number one rule when it comes to Agile is that everybody has to understand that we are going to be working with Agile, right? There should not be any kind of resistance, and they should understand how things work. Now, when it comes to a PO who just dictates everything and says that this is not the way it's supposed to be, so on and so forth, that means you guys are not really doing the fundamentals of Agile. It's about learning. Agile is about, it's a learning process of development. So you do something, you have your ceremonies, you learn from it, you move forward. If you're just there just to do extreme programming, right, that's a completely different setup altogether. Although it's Agile, but uh, there needs to be somebody who will be able to, make that PO understand that, okay, this is not how things work. If it's a daily stand up in, for example, if you're doing Scrum, there are just three questions. One is what you did today, what are you going to do tomorrow, and if there were any kind of issues. Where if there's an issue which is being prolonged, then that is taken offline. It's all about collaboration. If the PO is not collaborating, it's depends on where that PO is. If the PO is the CEO as well, so it's going to be very hard for you guys to convince that person that this is not how things work. Um, honestly, it depends on that PO. If you guys, anyone has that kind of, has the guts to actually go to the PO or talk to the PO and tell them, okay, that this is not how things work. If you want quality, this is what we need to follow. If he understands it, good and well. If he doesn't understand it, then there is resistance, and when there is a resistance in Agile, Agile falls apart, right? So maybe this is something you can actually transfer to that PO. That if you want a proper Agile setup, you need to understand how things are working, all right, or at least collaborate with us so that we can actually work together as a team instead of you being on one side of the river and we're on the other side. I hope that answers the question. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Of course, if you still have any kind of concerns, we can actually take it offline, and I can actually discuss this further, because that's a pretty big topic. The way I did it with my POs is I educate them. Because at the end of the day, the objective is the same. So we need to understand, how the work itself is, and then move on forward from there. Okay, so coming back, so we were talking about a product owner with only domain knowledge. So those guys are really the ones that I like to work with, because they're more collaborative and rely on the solution from the team. So because the technical team is more sound when it comes to giving a good solution, so that person relies on that. But again, because you guys or the development team is the one who's giving the solution, so there's quite some responsibility that falls with it. Then we actually have, is there any question? I can hear someone trying to.
There is one question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can.
In what situations would number one, the one with technical and domain knowledge, be actually better than number two? Is there any circumstances or scenario where it would maybe be beneficial to actually have somebody with technical knowledge as well?
Absolutely. If that person is on board when it comes to Agile, and that person actually listens and collaborates with the team and not just dictates, right? But so far, usually what happens is those people who have the domain and the technical knowledge are pretty much those people who are the C-suite, CTOs, right? They actually act as POs, right? Which actually becomes kind of like a dictatorship more than a team collaboration. But if there is a domain, a person who comes in, as a product owner who has domain and technical knowledge and is open for collaboration, then that would be perfect for the team. At the end of the day, Agile is all about collaboration, whether they have technical knowledge or not, whether they have domain knowledge or not. As long as there is proper collaboration and understanding in the team, that it will work out. Right? So any kind of resistance would actually be a downfall for that project. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, moving forward, product owners who have technical knowledge. So those guys are, I would say, they do not worry too much about the business and worry about their experience. So they would actually kind of like give you kind of like a guide in regards to how the system has to work. So it works both ways in terms of that the PO who has only technical knowledge, that person would need to go back and forth getting information about the business, right? Which actually creates a little bit of delay in the project itself. So this is kind of like a con, but the pro is that he's always open for giving guidance technically, and he can actually put in the input. But if you look at the proper PO, the PO is there to give requirements, the acceptance criteria, what is required to meet the objective, right? But those people who are just technical, they do not have that much business knowledge. It's kind of like a gray area where it can actually become a problem at the end of the project when it's actually released, and we get to find out that what was actually required was not met fully to meet that market. So that is a concern over there. But the most difficult is the product owner who was there just because he was nominated or he puts himself in that position, right? Those people are more concerned with deadlines, right? They will not understand the complexity of what needs to be done. So what happens is the teams which have planned something end up working longer hours. They end up being exhausted. And then because there's no vision or clarity of the product as well when it comes to these kinds of product owners. So the development team is kind of like running around with headless chicken. All of them have one thing in common, that they're a person who actually can give requirements to you. If they're collaborative, it's going to be a plus point. If they're dictative, we have a problem, right? So at that point, just as the question that came before, who's arguing all the time, questioning, so on and so forth, these guys actually have a lot of, ego involved into into the process, which actually frustrates the development team. And at the end of the day, the product is not as effective. So we have a question over here, another scenario. PO does not keep stories prioritized in product backlog, not provides enough details in stories, sometimes himself decides sprint backlog and then sends message, I have added stories in for the sprint. Have a look and let me know if you want to remove any story or add another. So once again, I have worked with these kinds of POs as well, but it's all about educating them. They need to follow a certain process. It doesn't have to be 100% Scrum. It has to be something which everybody can follow. Anybody who, it's consistent, right? So these things have to be educated. You cannot expect that, you guys are actually working on Agile and the PO has no clue about what Agile is, right? So education is very important. And honestly, at this point, I'm still going through this process where my PO is still getting familiar with how things work when it comes to Agile and how things are working. But because that person is, open, so it becomes easier for me to carry on with the sprint without any glitches or any hitches. So I'm working as an assistant PO as well with the team, which makes it very easy. So when it comes to these kinds of guys, you need to let them know that at least prioritize what you want, what you think is important. They give you the priority, and then you'll be able to tell them, okay, so this is what we can do. This is what we can do in this sprint, so on and so forth, right? So once again, everybody has to be on board with Agile in order for it to be successful. So if a person is just giving out the requirements or creating the backlog, not giving any priorities, not discussing that whether you're doing a backlog review, you're not doing a retrospective meeting, so on and so forth. If they're not involved in any of these things, they're just putting in requirements, then we will have a problem at the end of the sprint. The product which is supposed to be rolled out might not have everything that they need for the market at that point. And of course, at the end of the day, when we are delivering any kind of product, we're looking at the current state of the market. And then once we launch it, we try to keep up with it, right? So we need to make sure that, the PO understands the severity of having a priority with the backlog, which is very important. Maybe they can actually do it, prioritize the user stories, or at least have kind of like a release backlog as well, where they can actually prioritize, okay, these are the features that we want to have in the next release. Some kind of direction, some kind of vision is important for that. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go forward, if that's okay. And I hope that answers the question. Okay. All right. So moving forward, so basically, when it comes to what kind of POs are there, another issue is basically who are we dealing with? The POs which are local or DESI, at least you can talk to them in the native language. You can actually get the requirements quickly, understand it, so on and so forth. English speaking, no, we get a problem over there. They have a different level. We have a different level. So at the end, we tend to miss on requirements or misunderstand what the requirements are. When it comes to non-speaking English, like non-English speaking, but they're trying to speak English, so it's their second language as English and your second language as English. So there is a huge gap over there. So that is another issue that we face when we get requirements from these kinds of people, because it's not really understood what they say. We don't understand what they're trying to say or what they mean. When we try to tell them something, they might not understand you completely, so on and so forth. So this is kind of an issue that you get from POs. And at the end of the day, if you actually look at the most common issue that I believe, if not 100%, 90% face, that we get this kind of statement that what was required is not what was developed, right? And that is mainly because there is a gap between the requirements that we're getting and the and the development that we're doing. And because we actually think that Agile does not rely on documentation, that is where our downfall actually is. So I'll get to that. So when it comes to what are the reasons for that? One, the objective or the envisioned product or project was not clear in the beginning. So you are not clear about what you're trying to make, right? You're just told, okay, we need to make a product which has these guys of things. So you start working on it. You have no idea what the project, end is, what the vision is. So that is one problem that you will always face, with requirements. Next is the requirements were not captured properly, whether it's because of the medium, because of the person, because of any XYZ reason. But the requirements that were captured, they were not captured properly. Requirements were captured properly, but the understanding was different. This usually happens when the PO is not a native English speaker, and us being not native English speakers, we actually get that kind of problem. All right. One big, this is something that I really emphasize with my team, that the requirements that come in, it's supposed to be questioned. You just don't just ask questions about the requirements. You need to question the requirement itself. you get a requirement that you need to go from A to B. First question should be, why are we going from A to B? Instead of saying, okay, so how are we going to go from A to B? Is it going to be by bus, by train, by XYZ reason, right? So we simply fail to kind of ask that question in regards to why the requirement is there in the first place. When we don't ask that kind of question, it actually creates a void between you and the project manager, and the product owner is actually, he might not have thought about it, and he just gave you the first thing that popped in his mind when it comes to the requirements. So when you ask that kind of question as to, okay, so why are we doing this? When he's actually talking about it, or when he's actually thinking about it, he will realize that there might be some areas where he has to stop, right? So questioning the requirements is very important, just as important as asking the right questions about the requirements. So what could be the possible solutions? Number one, we have communication hurdles. We know we have communication hurdles. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we document them and we get a sign off. Now, the problem over here is that you might be thinking that the manifesto said that you're supposed to actually collaborate more than do contract negotiation. But now, let me ask you this question. Does anybody know who Taichi Uno is? I'm just going to give 5 seconds. Anybody knows the answer? Okay, so Taichi Uno is actually the creator of Kanban, who worked in Toyota. So he actually created a process of going from the backlog to different states and then getting it done. So it was pretty much a card system. Now, that person, if you look at that particular person, he was Japanese, right? So the Japanese have their own culture, they have their own type of working, they have their own processes, right? Now, it's going to be hard for me to do what a Japanese person would do, because I have a different culture, I have a different way of working, I have different characteristics, so on and so forth. So if I just give you an example, for example, if we actually have a bowl of rice and chopsticks, and we ask a Japanese guy that, okay, these are 3 bowls, and you need to take care of the first bowl, then take care of the second bowl, and take care of the third bowl. He will do it easily. Why? Because that was embedded in the culture. Now, if you take the same process, the same way of doing things, and bring it back to Pakistan, do you think anybody is going to be able to do it? Maybe a person who might have lived in Japan, maybe. But for the rest of us, we might not be able to finish the first bowl. Why? Because the culture, the chopsticks, which represents the culture, that is something, that's a factor that we try to force ourselves in order to implement the process. But being in Agile, being in when it comes to Agile, it is flexible, right? You need to mold it according to your setup, your environment, your culture. So the first thing that you would do is change the chopsticks to a spoon. If not a spoon, use your hands. That way, you'll be able to go through the process of the first, second, and third bowl easily. So this is what we need to understand, that Agile is a mindset, right? And we need to make a few changes that would help us be more efficient in giving out a product. And that is by documenting it and actually having a release for it, right? Having a sign off for it. That way, when we actually document it, send it to the PO, they would actually take time and understand what it is, and then sign it off. And anything that happens afterwards, it's the responsibility falls on everybody, right? Okay, so the second solution, once again, we need to question the requirement. Not only question about the requirements, we need to question the requirement. This will help in covering all scenarios of the project, all scenarios of that requirement. And, let me give you an example. One day, we actually, before I joined this new company, what happened was that they had a feature where the current project manager told them that you need to give us a whole requirement in regards to this feature. So the poor guy actually wrote a 14-page document in regards to that feature. Now, I took over. He sent me that document. I went through it. And all I asked him is, why are we doing this again? Right? So at that point, actually the question I asked was, so what is the objective? What are we trying to achieve? When I asked that one question, he actually paused for 5 minutes, right? And then he actually came up that, it was like, this is something that, this is what we want to do. I said, okay, so why are you doing it this way? There's a better way of doing it, right? So by negotiating with the PO, by asking the right questions, right? That would help the project overall. Instead of spending more time at the end of the project trying to fix it, it's better to spend a little time in the beginning in order to get a good product out. That is actually the third solution, which if you look at this, that Lincoln said that if you give me, the task of chopping down a tree, he would actually ask for 4 hours to sharpen the axe and then the rest of the two to chop the tree. So he is sharpening his the tools and what he needs in order to complete the task. So same thing when it comes to the requirements. It's better to have clear requirements in the beginning and work on it, get it signed off, and then develop it so that you can have a better product. Okay, I have a question over here from Farid, who actually says that often you don't have a choice to choose which Agile methodology you work with. So basically, the Agile methodology has to be chosen depending on the environment and the project that is coming in. Not all projects can fall under Agile. It depends on who the clients are, who are the people involved, who are the developers involved. So there might be a chance that a project that comes in, you need to skip Agile altogether and go to the conventional ways, right? So this kind of decision has to be taken in the beginning. You cannot change it in the middle because it doesn't make sense. And whenever you're gonna make that kind of change or you need to decide something, everybody has to be on board, right? So it's choosing a methodology has different factors. One is that everybody needs to understand what the Agile methodology is in the first place and how it needs to be implemented, how it can be implemented, and what results will be derived, right? But if you just simply said, I want to go for Agile, all right, of course you're going to get resistance because nobody knows about Agile or very few people know about Agile, right? And plus, once again, going Agile is not the only way to go or develop something, right? So it depends, once again, environment, people, and the client. Simple and easy. All right, so I kind of like repeated myself over here when it comes to the fourth solution. That Agile is not about sticking to the manifesto. Because at the end of the day, the manifesto was made by people who were either from North America or from Europe, right? They had a different culture. They have a different way of thinking. They have a different style of working. They have created this manifesto set as a guideline, and we can actually use it by molding it according to our environment to meet the objective, which is the main objective, which is having a working software at the end of the day. Yeah, so we're pretty much done with the first part. Just gonna go through a quick.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When you're talking about these, you're talking about a little bit of the cultural nuances of different places, right? There's a difference of cultural habits. So could you, even if example, could you give other examples as well?
So basically, so at the end of the day, when we're talking about Agile, when it comes to the manifesto as pure, if you go for pure Scrum, you just need to have a user story and an acceptance criteria and can move forward from there. But the problem with us is, for example, right now I'm working with a Danish client. Their English is not that good. right? It takes a really long time to understand them. So we really need to break it down, have mock-ups, have wireframes, send it to them, have a sign off on it, and then we start working on it because we know for a fact that their working style is different than ours, right? They're comfortable in speaking in Danish, of course. We're comfortable in speaking Urdu, but we have to come to a common ground. But when it comes to culture, over here, for example, if you actually look at the U.S. clients, there are more. They would say that, you know what, we don't care about the people. We want this done, right? But when it comes to European countries, for some odd reason, they understand that, okay, there is an exhaustion level. There is, you have to plan according to the capability of the person. You have to look at the level. They are more understanding, right? So if you're dealing with a US client, then you have to be very tough with your people as well, right? Which doesn't really work out. Why? Because there's a difference in culture. They think that hard work is about putting in more hours, right? Whereas the Europeans, hard work is actually more towards, working smart, working simple. Don't be overcomplicated, that kind of thing. So the best example, I believe, was the bowls of rice, right? A difference of culture does make a difference. I hope that answers the question.
Just one further clarification. Would this also be relevant for example, dealing with these, like, bases in Dubai versus bases in Pakistan may be very different, right? Is it about management style? How much of it? Are we talking more in terms of management style as opposed to like the cultural nuances, which might be relevant because bases might be a certain group which might act differently in Pakistan, might act differently in Dubai?
Yeah, so basically the culture is basically the environment where you're living and how they're actually working, right? So a Pakistani who actually goes to Dubai, for example, would conform to the culture which is over there because he sees it, he works upon it. But if he's working with a Dubai client or client from Dubai, he's working in Pakistan, he will conform to whatever is happening in Pakistan, right? So we need to make sure that whenever we're making a process or we're taking care of Agile, we need to make sure that it actually is beneficial for the team over here to work in an Agile mode, right? If it needs something needs to be changed in order for everybody to benefit. For example, the person in Dubai, again, he's not an English speaker. Usually, if he's an Arab, if he's from any other country, the English might be a little bit better. But what happens is that they have a different understanding. They have, when they say something, it might not be as clear as we think, right? There would be something hidden between the lines. They might think that, okay, this is obvious for them, but it's not obvious for us. So we need to bridge that gap, right? And that can only be done by documentation, right? So culture also results in basically a person who is over there. By looking at the normal things that are happening over there, something might be obvious for them, but as you change the culture, their common sense is completely different because of the culture. I'm sorry, I can hardly hear you. I'm sorry. Having a hard time hearing you guys. Maybe you can write in on the chat so I can read it out.
Please, if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. Otherwise, we might end up with a lot of background noise. Thank you. Yes, let's continue, Muneeb. That was, I think, background noise. Thank you.
Okay, all right. All right, so I'm just going to go quickly over the summary. We have another section we need to cover. I believe we're running a little bit short of time. So summary, we need to document the requirement to ensure that intended product is built. How do we document depends on what suits you, how you guys work for, how they conform to it. Some people want a two-liner, some people want proper use cases to be made, right? So if you need to do that, if it's helpful for both parties, go ahead and do it. Don't think that this is done part of Agile. As long as you're doing the rest of the things based on Agile, right? Documenting something will not really affect you in any way. It will actually be positive. Communication skills is very important. This is something that you guys need to go back to your teams, make sure that they are able to communicate. Now, when it comes to communication, I'm not talking about just being able to speak. That means being able to, reflect, being able to make the other person understand what you're saying and understand what the other person is saying, right? So it's a multi-directional skill. So we need to make sure that our teams are more conformed in being able to communicate with the PO, especially if that PO is not, a Pakistani or a native Pakistani. If they're from outside, we need to make sure that these skills are refined. So make sure that you're giving your team like 30 minutes or build an environment where they're able to practice the language. Being part of the requirements, question the requirements, and have clarity in regards to requirements by asking the right questions. Hazrat Ali said the same thing, that if the answers are not important, it's just the questions. Asking the right question, that will give you the right answer, right? So if you ask the right question, you're in the path and actually getting your product built properly. At the end of the day, Agile is a mindset and it's meant to be fluid. That means it can conform to the environment that it's in, right? If you think that you're going to freeze it and make it ice and you put it in a glass and try to get benefit from it, it's going to be very hard, right? So stick to it. Of course, you have the manifesto, you have the principles of Agile. Stick to those. But if you have to change something which actually would be positive for both the client as well as yourself, go ahead and do it. You can, there are hybrid models. You don't really need to stick just to Scrum. You can have a hybrid model with Waterfall, for example. Or if that's not happening, you can actually start using Kanban. You have test-driven development. There are a lot of ways to actually develop in Agile. Agile is an umbrella, and you can pick any methodology that actually works for you. But it has to work for you in order for it to, be beneficial. So choosing what is comfortable for you guys is first and most important thing. All right, so we're jumping to backlog management. I'll try to be as quick as possible. First of all,
hi, Muneeb.
we're going to, yeah.
Sorry to cut you. This is Madia Khan here. And I just need one moment. I would like to say hello to everyone on behalf of PASE. And today I wouldn't be able to stay in the session. So, and you are doing great. I have been online for 5-10 minutes, and you are doing great. So all the best. And I'll talk later with all the members, inshallah.
All right. Thank you so much, Madia.
Bye.
All right, take care. Bye. Okay, so we're going to be talking about what is a backlog, what type of backlogs or artifacts are there in an Agile, and how to manage your backlog. Once again, I need to say this, that these are based on my experiences and things that I might say right now might or might not work for you. The idea behind this session is so that you guys get inspired to, go deep into Agile and see how, people are working on it. And you will see that, there are different places are kind of like using different kind of methods and different kinds of processes in order to make their Agile work. Okay? So what is a backlog? Simply, backlog is a list of features or technical tasks which a team maintains and which at any given moment are known to be necessary and sufficient to complete a project. So that is so if we were to define a backlog, it's a bucket basically. And that bucket has all the important things that you need to take care of. And then, of course, in that bucket, or for example, you're going for a picnic, you have a picnic basket, right? So you would actually stack all the things that you want in that picnic basket in such a way that by the time you reach to the place where you're going to have fun, you will be able to sort out the entire, place with the food and everything else. If you don't prioritize what things goes first and what goes out, right, you will end up with a very messy place, right? So that is something that what backlog is basically the way to categorize your features for XYZ. I will get to what are the XYZ, but simply backlog is a bucket where you are putting all your tasks or the features or the user stories, so on and so forth. So what types of backlogs or artifacts there are? So you have a product backlog, you have a release backlog, which is kind of like debatable. Some people believe in it, some people don't. So I'm not gonna hold against anybody who doesn't believe on it. I sometimes use it, sometimes I don't use it because I'm handling 5 projects. And five of them actually are completely different in terms of what methodology we're using. So we have a project which has release backlog, and the rest actually don't have one. Then we have a sprint backlog. So basically, these are 1 and 3 are basically the common between with the projects that I'm actually using. So a product backlog, as you can guess from the product, it's basically what you intend for the product that you're trying to release or the project that you're taking care of. It has all the features. All the features have their user stories assigned to them, so on and so forth. So you create your bucket list for the product, and this is what we're trying to achieve. From that product backlog, we actually start pouring things into the sprint backlog, right? A sprint is basically a 2 to 4 week period. One misconception over here is that people think that a sprint can change from iteration to iteration, which is actually counterintuitive because a sprint is supposed to be fixed. If you decide on a 2-week sprint, you need to stick to a 2-week sprint, mainly because you will not be able to get the reports which are associated with the sprint without them. One major report is basically your velocity. You will not be able to get that kind of report out. Your burn down as such that, which will help you in your sprint sprint meetings or in your sorry, just slipped out of my mind. So basically, when you're planning the sprint, during that time, you would need to know that what was your velocity, what's your burn down rate, so that you can actually plan the sprints afterwards. So these are 3 main sprints: product, release, and sprint. Release backlog is basically the list of features that you want to have for a particular release. So backlog is the big bucket, and then from there you'd say, okay, from this big bucket, I'm going to put it in this smaller bucket, which is the one that I'm going to transport from one area to the other. And then the release backlog has sprints. Once again, the release backlog is not important as much. You can have the product backlog and the sprint backlog. But bottom line, backlogs are very important for you to work in Scrum or Kanban. So how to manage your backlog? First of all, you need to have a very clear product vision. Number 2, the Agile Manifesto Value 1 and the Principle 10. By any chance, does anybody know what is the Principle 10? Okay, so I'll just answer myself, I guess. All right. So basically, the Agile Manifesto, you already know that the value 1 is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. The second thing is the Principle 10, which is simplicity, right? Being simple in the way you are trying to manage your backlog. Do not be overcomplicated. When you have a feature, within the feature, have a user story, which is simple to understand. It's broken down. It's not complicated. It should not have too much information in it. We already know a user story is basically 3 lines. What a user is expecting to do and what should be the result, basically, right? So it should be simple. It should not cover a range of actions or range of items in it. Transparency, inspect, adapt. This is very important whenever we're talking about a backlog. Sometimes what happens is the product backlog is not visible to the development team. Yes, the sprint backlog is there, but the product backlog is not visible. Nobody knows what's the backlog is, where is it, what it is, where it's heading, so on and so forth. And that comes to the sprint backlog as well. We need to make sure that it is transparent. That means everybody's able to see it, be able to inspect it. That means be able to question it, be able to give suggestions, be able to give their input, which covers adapt as well. So this is the main thing when it comes. This is another main thing when it comes to managing the backlog. One thing that we kind of fall into the trap is that not everything has to be a user story. When we're actually doing a sprint, we try to put even those tasks which are not related directly with the project, for example, configuration, so on and so forth, we actually put it as a user story, which is not the case. You need to have the user stories for the product, but you can also have separate items as well, unparented items within the... Okay, we have a question. Who owns sprint backlog? If during a sprint a blocker issue is encountered and team needs to deal with it in current sprint, what should be the strategy here? Should we be allowed to remove some story of some way? Okay, so basically, when the backlog sprint, the sprint backlog is the development team as well as the product owner. If there is something which is a showstopper, now I'm assuming at this point that the product is live, right? One question: if it's live, then I do not suggest that you go for Scrum, for example, right? You need to go for Kanban, where you can actually prioritize something like this quickly and be able to take care of it. But when it comes to if you're planning your sprint, that means you're actually doing Scrum. So if you're doing it during a maintenance stage of a project, then it's going to be very difficult for you. But let's take care of the situation. So what happens is you would take care of it in the same sprint, but it will affect the sprint. The product owner needs to understand that this will affect the sprint, and there might be a user story that might go to the next sprint. So when it comes to a sprint, you don't remove anything from it because you need to have clarity and transparency in regards to what's happening. That I had 10 user stories. I was working with 10 user stories. We were going fine. We got a user story which is in the middle of the sprint, which eventually you'll have one sprint which is not taken care of, one user story which is not taken care of. That is the point where you can actually discuss in the retrospective meeting that this is the reason why we actually missed this, and this is how we can counter it next time, because it's a continuous learning process. So basically, putting an extra effort to do it. One thing that I'm kind of personally, I'm against actually overworking the developers, because already a developer has kind of 6.5 hours, maximum 7 hours of proper production, right? Where they can actually, work with complete focus. After that, their thinking power, their production actually is ineffective, right? So it should be clear that if something comes in the middle of the sprint, it will hinder the one of the user stories or more, depending on how big the issue was, right? And that can be discussed in the retrospective meeting and then taken care of in the next sprint. I hope that answers the question, Muhammad Ikram.
Muneeb, this is the right thing, but actually the high-ups look on the burn-down chart on. They're not much interested with your retrospective or things like this. I am talking about VPs and this layer that is high up. They're more concerned with the burnout charts, and somewhere somebody has told a new story comes in due to any reason, and it has to be done in sprint. You may move some stories of the same weight out of the story which are less prioritized stories. Something like this. Again, I think I could explain myself.
I'm trying to, because your voice was cutting off, I'll try to understand this. So what you're saying is because of the higher ups, instructing to do so, you have to do it, putting in extra time, or maybe remove a user story which was maybe low priority and move it back to the product backlog and take care of the new item that you actually worked on. Is that true?
Yeah, I think.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, kind of think this thing. Another thing that I wanted to say, at the end of the sprint,
Okay, voice, I can't hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah. So basically, yes, I can. Please go ahead.
Yeah, we have like 10 to 15 more minutes left. Perhaps we can wrap up the session. What do you say, Muneeb?
Yeah, let's quickly take care of this. And I believe this is, what's his name? I'm sorry. I think that's Mohammed Ikram. Mohammed Ikram, we can take it offline. We can discuss it further. Is that okay?
Sure.
So I'm just going to wrap up the session, and then we can have a separate session if you need. Okay?
Thank you. So nice of you.
No problem. All right. So the next point is following Dove or Invest. If you're not sure what Dove and Invest are, I'll just give you kind of like a small, abbreviation as to what Dove and Invest are. You can actually look into it further, right? So basically, when it comes to can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So Dove is basically making sure that when you're doing your backlog, your user stories have a proper description, right? They have a proper order. They have a value. That means how important it is. It should have some kind of maybe story pointing, right? And that covers the estimate part as well. So Dove is description, order, value, and estimate. You guys can actually look it up. And the second one is actually invest, right? Which is it should be independent. That means whenever you are working on that user story, it should not be connected to anything else that you can actually complete completely. It should be negotiable. That means you can collaborate on it. You can discuss it. It should have once again value, or it should be valuable. It should be estimatable. So you cannot just leave it open-ended, right? Make sure that it is small. So once again, for example, if I give you a small example, as a user, I should be able to add an item, right? So this is just talking about adding an item. It's not talking about editing. It's not about deleting. It's not about anything else. This is a simple user story where it's saying to add an item, right? And it should be testable. At the end of the day, it should be testable. So Dove and Invest, these are the process or the steps you can actually take whenever you are putting your items in your backlog. The backlog has to be manageable. Don't create such a huge backlog that you are not able to find your way around it. One issue is that we work on so many user stories, for example, and when we actually go for any kind of testing, the bugs, you don't really find the user stories for those. Then you end up making more user stories, which is kind of like weird. But this actually happens. So this is something that you need to see, that the backlog should be manageable. It should be categorized. Make sure whenever you're done with the sprint, or you're done with the release, you need to go back to your backlog. You need to look at it. What are the items there? There might be some items which are redundant. They might be outdated, or they might be obsolete. So it's good if you go there, visit them, and start removing them. Because the backlogs are supposed to be transparent, that means everybody sees it. So it doesn't freak out those people who are actually working on the project. So I guess we are pretty much done. So I'm just going to give you the end note. Once again, when it comes to Agile, there are no best practices, right? There are just practices. You need to look at what suits you, your project, your client, your your culture, your everything, and go for it, right? Sometimes you have to do a mix and match, right? But at the end of the day, my experiences might not work for you. Your experiences might work for somebody else, but not work for others, right? So there are no best practices. There are just practices which you can actually work on. One major issue that we have over here is that we just going for the label of Agile, right? We need to look at the objective of the project. We need to look at the type of the project. We need to look at the dynamics of the project before we actually go for a methodology, whether it's the traditional or Agile. You need to decide what is best for your project. At the end of the day, that is what's important, getting a product out to the market. Once again, Agile is a fluid. It can be shaped depending on the environment and the conditions of the project. One thing that I like to share with people is that, never put all your eggs in one basket, right? That means don't put all your projects into Agile. Don't force it into Agile. If it's worth doing Agile on it, go ahead and do it. If it's not worth it, there's no point in trying to, shove something which is not, doesn't make sense, right? So we need to look at the dynamics of the project before deciding whether Agile is important or not. But from experience, Agile does work out. Sometimes you have to mold it. Sometimes you have to change it a little bit. But try to have Agile work for you, and not the other way around, where you are trying to force Agile on the projects. All right, one quick activity. I know you guys are pretty much tired, I guess. So I'm just going to ask you one question. I'm going to give you a couple of requirements, and you need to give me the answer. All right. So this is a situation. You guys are going. You were not invited to a party, but you want to go to that party. So you go there, and you find that there's a guard or a bouncer over there, and apparently he's asking a secret question. A secret question where people have to give a password so that they could enter. So you go there and you try to figure out what's the algorithm or what's the password could be. So you stand there, you wait for people to come and be asked and see what the pattern is. The first person that goes towards the door, the guard asked him simply 6. The guy answered 3. He was let in. The other guy comes in, and the guard asked him 12. And the guy answered 6, and he was let in. Now, this is the requirement. First of all, do not think in the same domain. And the second requirement is that the obvious answer is wrong, right? So now you go to the bouncer, and he says 10. So what would be the answer?
Three.
Anybody else?
Is it 5?
Okay, 5. How did you come to 5? Amjad, please stick to your answer. I will get back to you. So why is it 5? So is that the obvious answer?
Yeah.
So that was the requirement, right? That the obvious answer is wrong, right? So I'm gonna ask Amjad, why is it 3?
Because the number of letters in 10 is 3, and the other one, for like the first one, he's answering the one, and the characters in that specific words are relevant to that one. Half of that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So basically, like I mentioned, there were 2 requirements. One requirement was that think outside the domain. So when I'm talking about think outside the domain, 6, 3, 12, 6, and 10, these are all math. So if you plus, minus, do anything, that's outside the domain, right? That's the domain, sorry. You have to think outside the domain. So when you think outside the domain, you'll go for English, right? So there are different ways of writing 3. This is the major problem that we have when it comes to requirements. When we are told something like write 3, right? We just go ahead and write the numeric 3. We do not ask, okay, is it going to be 3 as numeric, or is it going to be 3 as the letters 3? Right? Or in English 3, or maybe it's a different 3 altogether, different language, right? So we don't ask the obvious questions, which is sometimes our downfall. So I just leave it at that. I guess we are done. I believe we have gone over by 11 minutes. I'm sorry about that. But of course, I am available. You guys can either send your queries on the WhatsApp chat, and I'll try to answer them as quickly as possible. My number is on that group. So if you guys want to discuss further, we can discuss it over there. I think we have time for questions. I believe most of the questions were answered. So if you guys want to send me an email, you can send me an email to muneeb.zubair@gmail. And the rest of the information will be on your screen. So if you guys want to contact anybody in PAC, firm is there. And of course, Madhya. So those guys will be able to help you out. So thank you guys for your time. I know we took a little bit more time, but I hope you enjoyed the session. And, hopefully we'll continue doing these sessions in the days to come.
Great. Thank you very much, Muneeb, for taking your time out to present us and help us understand the product management part. Really informative session, and thank you very much for all those who participated in the session. If you have any more questions, the information is there on the screen. Use that. And you can also join our WhatsApp group. Follow us on social media to stay in touch with us. Good. So thank you very much once again, and bye for today. Let's stay in touch and meet each other in the next session. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you.